Look, right now, we're tracking a massive, glaring warning sign that is literally flashing red in the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data. And honestly, what we're about to uncover shows that the very foundation of the American economy is fracturing right beneath our feet. We aren't just crunching numbers today, we're mapping out a high-stakes story of systemic survival. We all kind of grew up believing that hard work pays off anywhere, right? That meritocracy just ignores state lines. But the terrifying reality hiding in this data is that your geography is secretly dictating whether you sink or swim financially. We're living in an era where your zip code isn't just a mailing address anymore, it's a financial trap. So let's look at the sheer mind-blowing scale of this divide. Okay, let's dive into this incredibly alarming stat. In Washington, D.C., your average worker is pulling in a massive $2,400 every single week. I mean, that is an absolutely astonishing concentration of capital. We are looking at a geographic epicenter where wealth is hyper-concentrated, setting this impossible bar that the rest of the country is utterly failing to reach. But then contrast that epicenter of wealth immediately with the reality at the bottom. In the 5 lowest earning states in America, workers are literally bleeding out opportunity, earning less than $1,150 a week. We're talking about average wages that are less than half of what we just talked about. And guys, this isn't just a gap. It's a terrifying, rapidly widening chasm that's effectively splitting this country into 2 completely different economic realities. Inside the wealth fortresses. Let's peel back the curtain and investigate how these highly insulated regions are driving this extreme disparity. The data brilliantly illustrates how systemic wealth is being aggressively hoarded. Just think about the dominant sectors across a few specific coastal strongholds: government, defense, high-tech, and finance. We're seeing a massive consolidation where the absolute highest-paying sectors are completely walled off in these specific regions. Basically, if you aren't inside one of these geographic fortresses, you're effectively locked out of the modern wealth boom. And what is truly alarming here is the human cost, and honestly the political disaster it represents. DC is this massive anomaly, heavily driven by federal agencies, defense contractors, and lobbyists. So what we actually have here is a scenario where the rule makers have created an insulated cluster of wealth completely divorced from the everyday struggles of the average American. The very people writing our economic rules are completely shielded from the economic crumbling happening everywhere else. Now let's move over to Washington state and see how this builds into another type of fortress. Out there, you have this hyper-concentrated mix of cloud computing anchors, think Amazon and Microsoft, combined with massive aerospace manufacturing from Boeing. And this traps extreme wealth within tight industry walls. These supply chains form a closed loop of prosperity. It's an economic walled garden that just continuously feeds itself, all while starving surrounding regions of equivalent opportunity. The bottom tier nightmare scenario. So the absolutely crucial point here is, what happens to the states excluded from these elite, high-paying sectors? Well, the breakdown of jobs in those areas spells out a complete systemic failure. The lowest wage states are trapped. They're relying heavily on highly vulnerable low-wage sectors like agriculture, tourism, food services, and retail. And these aren't just jobs. In the current landscape, they are economic dead ends. By being geographically bound to these industries, entire regions are essentially locking generations of citizens out of the massive wealth accumulation happening over in those coastal fortresses. The human cost here is a literal nightmare scenario. I mean, sure, families in these lower-paying states might boast about having cheaper housing, but the brutal trade-off? Zero upward mobility. They are stranded. They are forced to just sit back and watch the national wealth gap explode from the sidelines, completely paralyzed, unable to accumulate the generational wealth needed to survive the economic shocks of the future. The affordability illusion. But hey, do not be fooled into thinking the workers living inside the wealth fortresses have actually won the game, because the entire system is built on a very fragile mirage. Consider the timeline of wage growth over the last few years. It looks pretty positive on the surface, right? Weekly wages did artificially spike following a severe pandemic-era labor shortage, as desperate employers hiked wages to compete. But actually, scratch that. This surface-level growth masks a much darker systemic reality. It creates this false sense of security in a market that is fundamentally broken. We're looking at a brutal affordability illusion. See, the promise was bigger paychecks, but the reality is that those paychecks are instantly devoured by crushing, unprecedented costs of living. In these high-paying states, you have America's absolute highest housing costs. It's like an economic treadmill moving at lightning speed, creating this crumbling system where nobody actually gets ahead. The wealth you earn is extracted right back out through rent and mortgages. And this disconnect is so severe, so incredibly damaging to the human spirit, that workers across advanced economies are increasingly hitting a breaking point. They're legitimately questioning if grinding for longer hours, if sacrificing their lives to the labor market even translates to a better quality of life anymore. When the finish line just keeps moving further away, the game itself starts to lose its legitimacy. A system nearing collapse. We're witnessing the symptoms of an economic system nearing total collapse, where these regional disparities are completely warping survival for everyday citizens. And the systemic warning signs, they are impossible to ignore. As skilled workers desperately flock to the highest-paying state seeking a lifeline, they unintentionally ignite massive housing crises. They push demand to unprecedented levels. This fractures retirement decisions and creates exploding income inequality right within those very metro areas, aggressively squeezing out the middle class entirely. The fortresses are literally becoming unlivable even for the people inside them. So we must drastically redefine what geography means in this crumbling economy, because the data proves it. Geography is no longer just a dot on a map. It is the primary dictator of your financial destiny. It's a critical wealth trap that controls your career mobility, your family's future, and your long-term survival in an increasingly hostile economic environment. As the system continues to splinter, as the gap between the fortresses and the rest of the country turns into a permanent canyon, you have to stay incredibly alert to these warning signs. Look closely at the ground beneath your feet. Based on the data we've walked through today, you need to ask yourself the most important question for your financial future. Is your zip code setting you up for success, or is it preparing you for collapse?